bloody love fast estate cars. And if you don't, what the hell are you doing watching this video? Right, now they've gone, let's all have a little bit of time sharing our love of really big booted, really fast cars, shall we? There's been so many good fast estates over the years that really it's quite hard to pick just a few to work out which are the best, but you know what? We can have a go. This is probably the best time to talk about one of the greatest cars that Volvo made of all time, just when they've announced that they're going to stop making any more estates. The T5R was glorious in its strange shade of sort of off yellow, as they normally were. Massive, great big wheels, which had barely any tyre in order to fit underneath those massively flared arches, magnesium wheels, lots of power, front wheel drive. We'll get to that later. Really, the 850 T5R might just be perfect. It's certainly the greatest thing Volvo ever made. 240 horsepower warbled gloriously out of what was an inline 5-cylinder. And inline 5-cylinders hold a particularly lovely place in our hearts. It's the kind of thing you really shouldn't hear coming out of the back of what was essentially a car you normally used for transporting antiques around, especially not at 155 miles an hour. Now that said, the 850 T5R did have a few flaws. Features. Let's call them features. But really the main issue was that front wheel drive system, which did mean that it had quite a lot of torque steer and a little bit of axle tramp if you were really pushing it. But it could do 0 to 60 in 6.9 seconds at a time when the current Ferrari supercar was only just doing it in 5. And then, once you were moving, you really could make some thoroughbreds feel a little bit embarrassed. Want one? Tricky. There were only 400, ever. And obviously there's fewer than that now. So if you do want one, you really will need to be getting out about £10,000 today, but it'll absolutely be worth it. Surely this is blasphemy, right? An estate version of a Mitsubishi Evo. I mean, if you turn up at a Subaru Impreza owners club in the 5-door, they'll look a little down their nasally noses at you. But that's not the way to look at this. This isn't just an estate car. This is a large method of magnificently rearranging the internal organs on your Labrador. It had a pretty humdrum 4-cylinder engine that was attached to a turbocharger slightly smaller than the International Space Station, and that meant it had 276 humdrum horsepower and could do 150 humdrum miles an hour. And in fact, if you ask any of the people who drove it at the time, they will absolutely swear to you that there's no way that it had 270 horsepower. It was more like 300. No worries about front-wheel drive understeer here either. It had proper all-wheel drive, although for some reason someone at Mitsubishi decided that, you know what, the estate doesn't need the clever active yaw control that the saloon had, so this thing will just drift around all over the place. And your Labrador's probably not going to like that, and you may not either, because there's lots of scratchy 1990s Japanese plastics in here, just perfect for one of those claws to dig into. And those Japanese plastics, you're probably not going to massively like them yourself either. They feel a little bit cheap, although cheap is not a word you're going to use when you hear about its 6-month service intervals, or the fact that since you could never actually really buy one over here, you're going to have to find an import, and you'll need £30,000 to buy one. But you and your dog will have an absolutely wonderful time when you do, until the bills turn up. Now, a good showcase of the fact that I didn't actually write this list myself is the fact that numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4 aren't just Audi RS6s. But there's got to be one on this list somewhere, hasn't there? Now, if you want to know what an Audi RS6 can actually do, then go to YouTube search bar and type in Audi RS6 police chase, and then you'll see exactly what can happen. Now that you've all been away and watched that video, we should probably note that the people involved in it all got a combined 30 years in prison. Crime's bad, kids. But there's so many RS6s, which one do we choose? Well, we're gonna go for the 2nd generation one. Yes, that's the one where Audi decided to shove a Lamborghini V10 under the bonnet. Yep, an Audi estate car with a Lamborghini V10 as standard. And since it had Audi's fancy Quattro four-wheel drive system, that power was actually accessible, and it made you feel like an absolute hero. The kind of performance normally preserved for a WRC tarmac event was yours, and your IKEA furniture could enjoy it too. 579 horsepower, 650 Newton meters of torque, 0 to 60 in 4.2 seconds. This really was wonderful. And despite the fact that today the more accessible one is probably the S6 of its era, which also got the V10, you can pick up a second generation Audi RS6 for less than £20,000. Less than £20,000 to every single day experience a Lamborghini V10. What are you waiting for? An estate car, built by Rover in its death throes, fitted with a 4.5 litre V8 that produced 240 horsepower. This doesn't really sound like something that should be on this list. But be reassured, while Rover was in the process of eating itself, its little friends over at MG would just continue to do what they do, fiddle with things and make them really fast. So that Rover has its suspension sorted and has had its chassis fiddled with. And that big V8 that doesn't really make a lot of power, well, it came from the Ford Mustang, so it's full of lovely torque and it sounds excellent. Also, the way that the MG ZTT was developed is so delightfully British, it almost hurts. Why? Well, during the development of the MG ZTT, they found out that it suffered from quite a lot of axle tramp. Now, how did they diagnose this problem? Very simple. They tied an MG ZT to the wall, and then a very brave engineer lay underneath it while he watched what was happening. The ZTT even came with a limiter, so it could only do 155 miles an hour. And there are people out there who've taken the limiters off and found that it could then do 155 miles an hour. The reality is that a C63 or a RS4 would absolutely destroy it the moment that you put them on a track together, but the MG ZTT is British. We just don't make cars like that anymore. And what else has a daft V8? You can still pick one up for £15,000. £15,000, eh? So, there are two S212 Mercedes AMG E63s, or is that Mercedes AMG's E60? Oh, whatever. There's two of them. The later one had a 5.5 litre V8, but there's absolutely no way that we're going to talk about that when the 63 part of E63 stands for the fact that it originally had a 6.3 litre V8, which wasn't turbocharged. But there's no replacement for displacement and all that. It's just going to be better, isn't it? That meant 630 Newton meters, 525 horsepower, the ability to do 155 miles an hour. It revved to 7,000 RPM and could therefore hit 60 miles an hour in 4.5 seconds, all while doing a glorious maximum of 18 miles to the gallon. Also, back then, the E63 didn't try and look like it was going to murder your mother and kidnap your children. If you didn't know what you were looking at, it looked like, well, it just looked like a Mercedes estate car. Until you actually turned it on, at which point people all around you would be wondering exactly why Armageddon had started. And it has all the same qualities that the RS6 has, like more space inside than the Millennium Dome, or the ability to scare anyone with you while still carrying every single thing that you own. And it was rear-wheel drive. So at the touch of an accelerator, big drifty estate fun is right there for you. It is very thirsty though. It drinks more fluids than a man who's just been rescued from the Sahara, but you can pick one up today for about £15,000. Do not, under any circumstances, buy a BMW M5 E61. Just don't. It would be the worst purchase decision of your entire life. They are almost hilariously unreliable. The gearbox changes gear slower than your gran, and for some reason they fitted it with such a small fuel tank you'll probably have to fill up twice before you've gotten to Sainsbury's. But, well, of course we want one. It had the V10 engine derived from BMW's Formula One program. Yes, a massive screaming V10 engine and do 205 miles an hour. It's insane. It really was BMW's fiscal responsibility department just having a year off. After all that, if you've recently had a lobotomy or been delobed and you do still want to buy one, then you can. They'll probably set you back about £40,000. And then you'll discover the fact that every single one of the services probably costs four figures. But if you want to do that, you're our hero, and good luck to you. And here we come to the end, the pretty one. Surely the Alfa Romeo 159 Sportwagon must be the prettiest estate car that's ever been made. It is a showcase that Alfa Romeo, for its entire history, will absolutely refuse to make any boring looking cars. And then they improved it by sticking the notoriously musical 3.2 litre Busso V6 under the bonnet. And they gave it some flared arches and stuck some wonderful telephone dial alloys on the side. And on the inside, it just continues to get good. It's got those classic round Alfa Romeo dials and really rather overly bolstered seats. And it's that, plus the fact that there is a law that if you create a list of the best cars, there must be an Alfa Romeo on it, that make it onto this list. But this being an Alfa Romeo, it does have its flaws. It's front-wheel drive, which means it is fantastically liable to understeer, and the ride could best be described as jiggly. But as we recently found out in our Future Classic series when Becky drove one, there's a few aftermarket things you can do to fix all of that. And just look at it. If you want one, it's about £15,000. And those are our favourite fast estate cars of all time, from Volvo to Alfa Romeo via an Audi that has the V10 from a Lamborghini. But what do you think of it? It's time to let us know in the comments, and if you did enjoy this video, don't forget to give it a like, and then subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon to make sure you see everything that we do on Goodwood Road and Racing.